You're listening to the Hawke Media Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping entrepreneurs and executives crush the digital marketing game. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's get into the show.
All right, you're listening to HawkeTalk. I'm here today with Chris Voss. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm good. So taking it back, as a 2-3-year-old, were you like negotiating nap times with your parents, like immediately knew how to like work the system? Take me way back. Where were you born? Where are you from?
Yeah, I'm a small town boy from Iowa, Midwestern blue collar family. Father was an entrepreneur, pretty much sole proprietor. He had a secretary and a helper. Very blue collar business, delivered gas and fuel oil products.
Oh, okay.
Fixed furnaces.
Got it.
The business initially, I can remember, 11 o'clock at night in the middle of winter, my dad would go out to fix somebody's furnace because they didn't have any heat in their house.
Wow.
My mom initially was a stay-at-home mom, but then as we grew up, my dad got into the convenience store business, convenience stores and gas stations, and my mom got involved and she started helping that. So
he owned them, is what you're saying?
What's that?
He owned them? He owned convenience stores and gas stations?
Yeah. Started running his own operation. Initially, he was supplying the gas stations, and then, the Vosses, we look at what somebody else is doing, and we go like, I could figure that out. It can't be that hard.
Love it. And you have siblings too?
Say that again.
You have siblings too?
Yeah, I got one older sister and 2 younger, so there were 4 of us.
Nice, awesome. And so tell me about the upbringing. You got an entrepreneurial dad, stay-at-home mom, then helped with the family business. Did they put you to work? Were they encouraging you to get out there and do your own thing? How was that as a kid?
Yeah, no, my dad thought he's providing room and board. We might as well pitch in and help. So started working for my father. We all did, kind of as far back as I could remember. My dad was very much a figured out guy. Like if he had a task that he needed to figure out, then his attitude was, you should be able to figure it out also. My son, I used to send my son back to Iowa every summer, initially for 2 weeks. And then as years went by, he'd stay, good 4 weeks. My son grew up a Jersey guy, and kind of an interesting combination of New Jersey and Iowa. But and he goes back there every year for this annual tractor celebration, and they like to call him Metro Jethro. So my son Brandon, the president of the company, interesting cat in and of himself. Awesome. But we've always joked that working for my father, a man who would never ask you to do anything he wouldn't do himself. And there wasn't anything he wouldn't do himself. Like if it didn't matter what it was, if it needed to get done, it didn't matter how ugly, how dirty it was. You did it. He did it. And we actually had a couple people when I was in high school. A couple people worked for my dad that was like, this work is too hard, or this work is beneath me. And a guy who'll do something himself, if you tell him this is beneath me, then you're not going to last, because honest work is honest work. And that's kind of how I grew up. Got it.
And growing up, were you really focused on helping business going through school? Were you an athlete? Were you into other things as well?
Yeah. I don't know that I ever really thought about it helping a business. It was working for dad. It was, pitching in. It was expected. It was family operation. My father encouraged some sports, discouraged others. My father played football himself in high school. So, football and basketball, the traditionals during the year sports were cool, regardless of what I wanted to do. I played football and basketball. I do remember
things you wanted to do.
I'm sorry?
Did you have other sports you wanted to do other than?
Well, yeah, there were, the summertime sports. Like I can remember one year I decided I wanted to play golf. I wanted to be on a golf team. Now my father liked to play golf, and he let me participate as a youngster and on Saturdays in a golf league, and I could play golf. But as a sport, it was a no-go. And it was funny because the golf coach was the head football coach, a revered guy and a good friend of my father's. Mm-hmm. And when he found out I wanted to play golf and my dad was against it. He's like, yeah, I'll talk to your dad. Don't worry, I'll work it out. And no, that negotiation didn't go anywhere.
So do you think some of the negotiating side do you think you got a little bit of that as a kid, like arguing with your dad about this stuff or negotiating, or where did you start? Do you think you started getting that knack for that side of things?
Yeah, I developed an interest in it. I mean, I don't know that anybody's natural at anything. If you're natural at anything, it's only because maybe you could learn. I mean, I think I'm coachable. I think I learn. I'm interested in learning. I'm very coachable. Adam Grant wrote a book called Originals, and he talked about that originals have a high degree of a trait that's known as openness. And, there's a quick down and dirty test at the very beginning of Adam Grant's book about whether or not you can tell how open you are. And I sort of, I got basically a B+ on the test.
Yeah.
I think I'm very coachable. And, that was the environment that I grew up in, which was be coachable, figure it out.
Yeah.
And then negotiation, anything else. Daniel Coyle wrote a book called The Talent Code that says nothing is natural. Yeah. Now, it's natural if you're 7 feet tall.
Right.
But, there are more gifted athletes, more physically gifted basketball players than Michael Jordan was. He worked at it. Yeah. He had a work ethic. And as a matter of fact, now we're talking about it, he always prided himself on being very coachable.
Yeah.
Hence the reason why he did so well at North Carolina. It's either North Carolina State, Dean Smith.
Yeah.
They wanted coachable players.
Yeah. It was UNC, right?
So yeah, he worked hard and he was coachable. I mean, those are kind of the two elements. And then you find something that interests you. And Coyle says that the prodigies, the naturals, they just got interested before anybody else realized that they were interested, and they were substantially down the route of their 10,000 hours before anybody noticed that they loved it.
Which you just nailed my question. That's why I'm asking. So I'm curious, where did the 10,000 hours start for you, do you think, on the negotiating side?
It actually really started there were seeds that were planted that I didn't realize that were planted. When I was a cop in Kansas City, Missouri, a bunch of the detectives got kicked out of the detective bureau. They had a dispute with the police department over whether or not being a detective was a promotion. And one of their contentions was, well, it must be a promotion because once we go to the detective bureau, we stay. Nobody ever comes out. And the police department said, oh, well, we'll fix that, and kicked half of them back out into uniform.
Wow.
So bad for them, good for guys like me, because suddenly a lot of really seasoned people who are good at talking to people are in the car next to you. Yeah. And I can remember this one guy came out, super low key dude. I was, sort of an adrenaline junkie, young cop at the time, arrest bad guys, take control, be very commanding. And this guy was really soft-spoken and would get results faster than I ever did. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking like, wow, there's something to this. Mm-hmm. And I remembered it. And then finally, I go through my bureau time and I'm on the SWAT team, and I decide to take a run at the hostage negotiation team. And after I got trained there, and I saw a lot of the same attributes that this guy had. So, that's kind of how a lot of that started.
I got it. And so taking a step back, you go through high school. In high school, did you work other jobs, or were you working with your family mostly?
Predominantly my family. I took a couple of times, one of the gas stations that my dad gave supplies to, they hired me on to work some pumping gas there for a while. And I did that some. But that was principally my high school days.
And then did you go right into police academy, or did you go to college? What was next after high school?
No, I went to college. I mean, my dad wanted all of his kids to have a college degree. The unspoken deal was, I'll foot the bill for 4 years of college. Yeah. If you don't get out in 4 years, that's your problem. But you got 4 years to get a degree. We'll talk about where you want to go. I followed my older sister to Iowa State University. I always looked up to my older sister, and it was a combination of a bigger environment, and far enough away from home that my father wouldn't expect me to work for him on the weekends.
And did your father go to college or was?
Yeah, my dad joined the Marines at age 17.
Yeah.
And I think if you join the Marines at age 17, you were probably a handful for both your high school and for your parents.
Yeah.
Now, that's not absolutely guaranteed, but you probably were. And my father and his older brother, 17 and 19, they joined the Marines at a young age. Korean War time. My dad was young enough; they never sent him to Korea. He didn't see combat, but he was an MP on the West Coast.
Uh-huh.
He gets out, and then he goes to college. He probably went on the GI Bill. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he got a college degree and met my mom, who settled him down, and then he became a businessman.
Got it. Awesome. And so go to college. What did you study? What did you think you wanted to do at that point?
Well, when I went to college, I always knew I wanted to be in law enforcement. I got the bug when I was about 16.
Where'd that come from?
I saw a movie that inspired me, and I realized the title of the movie is kind of cheesy, but it was the Super Cops. It was about true story of two New York City cops that were wildly creative and innovative, and they were mavericks. They really sort of didn't follow commands, instructions, but they put a lot of bad guys in jail. And I was really impressed by three things: how much fun they had doing their job, how much creativity they employed, how much good they did, and I guess four things: how much the community loved them. They worked in an extremely tough neighborhood in New York City, but like all neighborhoods, even the tough neighborhoods are mostly good people. And the good people in those tough neighborhoods loved them. I was really impressed by all of that. So it inspired me to go into law enforcement. Got it.
And so what were you studying in undergrad to help with that?
Well, when I first started, I got in as an engineer. Iowa State's an engineering school, and everybody had aspirations for me to be an engineer. And then I got there, and I knew I was going to go to law enforcement, so I switched to sociology. But then, even then, I realized if I changed my mind, sociology as a safety net might be limited. So I switched, and I got a business degree. I ended up with a business degree from Iowa State.
Got it. Keep your options open. Did the same thing. And so, did you come right out and join the academy? What was next?
Yeah, straight to Kansas City while I was still in college. And my senior year, went down and put in my application for KCMOPD. They paid a premium for college graduates, but it wasn't a requisite, prerequisite. You could get in with a high school degree. Mm-hmm. So, but they did give preference for college graduates. So I joined initially. They told me we're not hiring. It was actually fiscal year issues. So about 2 months after I graduated, I ended up getting hired because their fiscal year turned.
And were your parents super supportive? Were they resistant?
Yeah, my dad was a little reluctant. He paid for a college degree, and I went out and I got a job that didn't require a college degree.
Yeah.
So, they were tolerant, supportive.
Okay.
My first 2 years there, and then my father, after 2 years, he realized that I was probably going to stay in law enforcement, so he wanted to get me interested in federal law enforcement.
Oh.
And so he saw that as a step up. That's not necessarily true, but that's the way he saw it.
Yeah.
So he introduced me to a buddy of his that was with the Secret Service. And I remember meeting that guy, and he said, I have traveled all over the world with the Secret Service. And I thought, really? I barely been across the Mississippi River all over the world and get paid at the same time. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
So as luck would have it, serendipity, the universe, the Secret Service was not hiring. The FBI was. I didn't know one federal agency from another. So I thought, let's see what the FBI has. And they hired me.
And that was 2 years in, you said?
I was about 2 years on the job when I applied, and I was just short of 3 years on the street when the Bureau hired me. Got
it. And you said while you were on the police side, did ended up on SWAT too?
I was slated to go to the SWAT team. It was kind of an interesting dilemma. And again, the why, the U-turns, the forks in the road, a lot of times you don't see it. The Bureau hired me on October 16th. I was scheduled to be eligible to get transferred to the SWAT team on October 31st.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably would have gone then or shortly thereafter. The Bureau would have delayed simply a month. I never would have left Kansas City.
Wow. Because once you joined, you would have wanted to see that through too, correct?
Yeah, SWAT team, that's a lot of fun. I would, I'd been actually sitting on the bench for 8 months.
Oh, wow.
Waiting to go to the SWAT team. I participated in a selection about 8 months earlier, finished number one on the selection process, but I didn't have the sufficient amount of time on the street for them to allow a transfer. And I just participated in a selection. Nobody thought I would do that well. They thought it would be a good experience for me to learn.
Yeah.
And when I was number one, one of the lieutenant colonels in charge of administration said, I don't care who this guy is. You got to have 3 years before you can get transferred. So he held up my transfer.
Got it. And so did you stay in Kansas City with the FBI or did you transfer to somewhere?
The Bureau had a policy at the time to uproot you from home.
Got it.
When you become an FBI agent, it's a new identity. You really got to start over. And they don't do it anymore this way because it's expensive.
Yeah.
But to make it easier for you, they uprooted you from home and you start over in a brand new city, small to middle-sized environment. So, the pace it's not New York City. It's not moving as fast as New York.
Yeah.
And you get some time to get used to being an FBI agent. And so they uprooted me from Kansas City and sent me to Pittsburgh.
Got it. And were you still excited landing in Pittsburgh?
Well, I've always loved a new challenge. Like I found out that I got a bit of a gypsy in me. In total, I've lived in seven cities since I graduated college. I mean, actually taking up legal residence in 7 different cities. I love going to new places. I enjoy it a lot. Got it.
And so tell me about the first few months at the Bureau, like jumping in there. Was it just exciting and fun and learning, or did you how was it?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, they try to start you out easy. You got to, it sounds crazy, but you kind of got to get used to holding up your credentials and saying that you're an FBI agent. And ideally, the first time you don't do that is there isn't a Hell's Angel on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
So a lot of places they will start you out actually doing background investigations on applicants.
Yeah.
For either the FBI or you do a lot of cabinet level positions, a lot of White House security clearances, stuff like that. Get you used in small stakes practice for high stakes results, which is a theory that we've adopted in a Black Swan group as part of the Black Swan method. So the Bureau gets you some small stakes practice, showing your credentials to somebody because you're looking for an employment file on an applicant to the FBI.
Yeah.
So it starts out fairly easy. And then after I'd been there for about 6 months, I got transferred to surveillance. And learned about following people around.
Got it. So you're doing straight out of a movie, sitting in the van outside of a mafia boss's diner, that kind of thing?
Actually, that actually was the case. There was at the time one of the very active but smaller organized crime families, not one of the 5 families out of New York.
Mm-hmm.
There was an active and powerful organized crime family in the Pittsburgh area. And there was a nightclub outside of town where these guys loved to meet for breakfast.
Yeah.
And we would go and we would, take pictures of who was coming in and out. And I'm an innovative guy. I saw, there's a special camera setup that I'd seen at the Academy at Quantico. And so they put together a special location for me to be in across the street to take pictures with this high speed lens.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, I took pictures of a guy that the last photos of a guy that disappeared, who had fallen out of good graces.
Yeah.
And those photos ended up being a part of a very large prosecution that came down 2 years later. I was just trying to be innovative, be creative.
Yeah.
And I took some critical pictures because, I wanted to think of interesting things to do.
Yeah. I mean, you're stuck there surveillancing. You think that you'd want to actually do something about it. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
surveillance is about 7.5 hours of sitting still and about 20 minutes of scrambling to keep up with somebody without letting them see you.
I've always wondered, because again, you see it in movies, most people don't hear about it in real life. Like, do you just drink a ton of caffeine to stay awake? Like, how do you sit there for 7.5 hours? And then if you drink a ton of caffeine, how do you sit still? Like, how did you balance that? Like, just sitting for 7.5 hours? Did you do other things?
Yeah, well, the guy who's watching specifically either the door or the person, and usually it's a door, that's called the eye, the primary eye.
Yeah.
And you're only going to take the eye for an hour at a time. Otherwise, you're gonna fall dead asleep, and you ain't going to do anybody good. Actually, it's hard to stay awake for an hour as it is.
Yeah.
And then when you're off the eye, you get out of your car, you move around, you read a book.
Yeah.
You do got to do something to keep your mind active, or otherwise, your brain turns to mush.
Makes sense. And is it usually two of you alternating, or?
No. As a matter of fact, it's extremely difficult to do a surveillance with any less than 3 people. And three people, you got to be good. I mean, you got to be good.
Yeah.
Ideally, you got about 7 out there.
Got it. Wow. Okay. And so how long were you in surveillance? How long did you stick with that?
I did surveillance for about a little over a year in Pittsburgh. And then when I got sent to New York, they put me on the surveillance team for the terrorist task force.
Wow. And what year was this, give or take?
This was 1986.
Okay.
When I got sent to New York.
Yeah.
And now that was a different ball game. Surveillance in New York, we got out on foot. Terrorist surveillance in New York.
Yeah.
You had to be prepared to be in any neighborhood in New York, and that means the toughest neighborhood in New York, alone, on foot, at night.
Wow. And were you armed usually?
Well, yeah, you'd be armed, but I mean, if you had to actually show your gun to get out of trouble, it had already gone bad.
Yeah.
So what you really, first of all, you had to look like you weren't the target.
Yeah.
And then actually the interesting thing about tough neighborhoods in New York, bad guys are not idiots.
Yeah.
And they pick up on who's a cop real fast. And so you don't let the guy you're following see you. But the rest of the bad guys, they see a guy looking like me by myself in a neighborhood, like that dude's a cop. Just, he's more trouble than he's worth. Leave him alone. Yeah.
Got it. Did you ever end up getting into any trouble outside of that? Like, did that cause any trouble? Did any bad guy not know you were a cop?
Nobody really descended on me on duty. Okay. I had a couple of people mistake me for easy targets off duty a couple of times. I once in a park in a really tough neighborhood, I once had a swarm of about 8 late teens attack me. But you produce a 9mm that tends to give you breathing room.
Yeah. As you said, though, it's already gone bad.
It had gone bad. Thank God I produced my gun before any of them got within arm's reach, because they were street smart too. And when they saw me reach, I mean, they're smart enough to know you're probably reaching for something.
Yeah.
And when you actually produce a gun, their survival instincts take over. And if they haven't actually touched you yet, they are going to disappear.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. And so how long were you on surveillance in New York?
Between surveillance in Pittsburgh and surveillance in New York, my first 6 years were almost all surveillance.
Got it. Okay. And then what happened next? What was kind of the progression from there?
Well, I decided I want to go inside and talk to people, actually handle the cases myself instead of doing surveillance on cases for other people.
Yeah.
And so I shopped around a little bit. I ended up actually on the terror squad that was my last choice. And it ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me, because then it put me square in the middle of the investigations that turned into what was the first World Trade Center bombing.
Hey, that's the timing I was thinking about. That was 93?
Yeah. February 93, when at the time that the Trade Center was hit, the FBI and New York City Police Department had decided there was no terrorism in America.
Wow.
They had reassigned all of us to gang crimes. Being the mavericks that we were, all of our terrorist cases qualified also as gangs. We retitled them as gang cases. And then that's the reason why the first World Trade Center bombing was solved so quickly. Because, we had been on the periphery of these people, hadn't got to the heart of what they were doing, but we'd been on the periphery of them for several years. And when the piece of evidence came that linked directly to our investigations, we scooped them up in a hurry.
Got it. Wow. Because I was young. I was born in '86, but I remember that whole thing, and I remember hearing about it when 9/11 happened, and about how there was basically another attempt a long time before that.
The mastermind of 9/11 is actually literally the uncle of the guy that masterminded 93.
Wow. Got it. And so how long did you stay on that task force and that team investigating terrorism?
I was in New York for 14 years, and I was on a terrorist task force in one form or another for my whole 14 years.
Got it.
The last year I was there, I had rotated into another position on the task force because they knew I was thinking about going to Quantico full time. So they put me in a position to mentor some of the younger guys a little bit more.
Got it. Okay. And then when did you make the transition to like hostage? Did that happen next, hostage negotiation, or did you have another step before that?
Yeah, no, most law enforcement agencies, their hostage negotiators start out doing it as an additional duty.
Got it.
So the FBI's got a structure pretty much like everybody else does. The negotiators are scattered throughout their ranks. So I became a negotiator while I was still in New York and still on a terrorist task force, and did it as an additional duty, and it enhanced my interviewing skills.
Yeah.
And so I by the time I left New York, I was actually in charge of the negotiation team.
Okay, got it. And on the terrorist task force, were you actually negotiating with specifically terrorists, or would they call you in for other jobs too? Don't negotiate with terrorists is about the biggest cliche line you hear, but
right. Well, in point of fact, that cliche line is actually wrong. We don't make concessions to terrorists.
Right.
If those people that look at negotiation as concession, which is another thing about the methodology for the Black Swan group.
Yeah.
We don't look at negotiation as concession. Hence the title of the book, Never Split the Difference. We're not going to concede. We're going to come up with a better deal, but the last thing you want to do is concede. And I had really been grounded in those principles as a hostage negotiator. It's not concession, it's communication.
And where did that come from? Was that just from lack of a better word, trial and error? Was there like some great mentors you had on that side? Where did that come from of understanding that? Because I've read your book too, and there's a lot of brilliance in it versus like what people think of as negotiating and what actually, it makes sense. If you've been in business, if you've been in a negotiating table enough times, you read your book and you're like, oh yeah, hopefully you've done some of it intuitively, but it's really the right way to do things.
Yeah, I think, some of it came from the fact that I was a SWAT guy to begin with.
Yeah.
I viewed the two as working hand in hand. And then the guy that was in charge of the negotiation program overall for the majority of my time, a guy named Gary Nessner. I learned a lot from Gary. Gary mentored me. At some point in time, he noticed me and, wanted to develop me. So I learned an awful lot from Gary, and Gary was about communication, not about concession.
Got it.
So I learned a lot from Gary Nessner.
And so going back, was a lot of your time spent talking to terrorists when they needed someone to talk to them, or did they pull you out for other jobs too?
Yeah, that's the way it goes down in the movies. In reality, the vast majority of domestic stuff in the United States is really crisis intervention.
Yeah.
It's not, the classic straight out of the movies bargaining.
Right.
Now, I was lucky enough. I negotiated a bank robbery hostage taking. Mm-hmm. And that's a really rare thing to have happen. Like bank robberies take hostages, but the bad guys make it a point to be gone before the cops show up because they know the cops are coming. It's a bank after all. And they have bank alarms. Yeah. So actually to catch somebody on the inside is a really rare event. It won't happen one time in the US this year.
Right. Got it.
It's that rare. It doesn't even happen once annually.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough. It happened in Brooklyn when I was in New York, and I got over there and we put together a team between the FBI and the NYPD, and I was the second guy on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I got one of the bank robbers out to surrender to me.
Wow.
But my experience prior to that, I did a couple domestic things. The lot of cross training and hostage negotiation among all aspects of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So we trained most of the teams in and around the New York City area. The first one that I really got involved in that was an actual negotiation is school teacher barricaded himself was suicidal, barricaded himself in his house in Dobbs Ferry, New York, because there was an allegation that he'd had an inappropriate relationship with a 13-year-old female student.
Mm-hmm.
Now he hadn't.
Yeah.
He'd been mentoring her. They were good friends.
Yeah.
But those sorts of allegations will destroy somebody's life.
Yep.
And the allegation was leveled, and the guy barricaded himself in the house. And we showed up unannounced, myself and one of my colleagues, Richie. And because Richie had such a great relationship with the local cops, they let us onto the scene. We walked up to the negotiators, and we just became part of their team and supported them.
Got it. And so what does that look like? Are you on the phone with him, or are you just giving them advice and not advice, but your own perspective on how they should handle it?
Well, we'll be depending upon how many negotiators are there, and there were only 2 negotiators that were there at the time. So the first thing we did was started to give a little bit of play-by-play to command.
Okay.
Like, all right, here's the dynamic that's going on. Here's what I think. And I can remember real clearly when we walked in on Dobbs Ferry, both the negotiators had been awake for over 30 hours.
Uh-huh.
And these guys were exhausted.
Yeah.
And so I looked at the commander and I said, all right, number one, I am not getting on the phone. Number 2, your guys are exhausted and you need more negotiators.
Yeah.
I am not getting on the phone. And the third part here is our subject inside is enjoying this conversation so much with your primary negotiator. He's figured out that when he comes out, he no longer gets to talk to this guy. And so your best move is going to be to change negotiators to get him to come out.
Yeah.
And I am not getting on the phone.
Yeah.
And, commander is sitting there and he kind of wonders if that isn't what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't really know. He thinks his guys are tired, but he doesn't know how effective he is. And it seems like the subject inside is really attached to the negotiator,
Yeah.
but he doesn't really know what to make of that.
Yeah.
And so he looks at me and he says, we don't have any more negotiators. How about if we put the backup coach on the phone and you coach him? And I'm like, all right, I ain't getting on the phone, but I'm happy to coach your guy directly.
Yeah.
Put the second negotiator on, a guy named Chet, absolute superstar. The disruption, but in a very positive way, sort of woke the guy up on the inside.
Yep.
And 20 minutes later, he came out.
Wow. So he was just kind of, as you said, he liked the guy. He was just kind of hanging out and kind of exhausted at that point and just sitting around. And there was no change in environment, so it didn't cause any type of change in thought.
Right. In any negotiation, you can disrupt it and have positive things happen.
Yeah.
If you disrupt it gently.
Yeah.
And it's mostly has to do with tone of voice. And then you allow your effects to settle in.
Yeah. Makes sense. And so how long were you on the hostage negotiation side of the bureau, or you went to Quantico, you said?
Yeah, I started it as an additional duty actually in 92, and then in 2000 it became a full-time job. When I got promoted, transferred to Quantico, it was a full-time gig. It was no longer part-time. I went down to the unit. Gary Nessner was running the unit.
Uh-huh.
He had recruited a bunch of guys that he thought a lot of, and I got a chance to work with some really sharp guys and gals, and we breathed it. I mean, we lived it.
Yeah.
And then Gary's vision was to give everybody, if you had a certain area you want to specialize in, Gary would let you be in charge of it, take the lead. And I loved international kidnappings, and at the time I had more terrorism experience than anybody other than Gary.
Yeah.
And so he put me in charge of our international kidnap response.
And so, in whatever you can share, what kind of stuff did you have to, obviously it's a little self-explanatory, but what kind of situations did you get into on that?
Yeah, it was almost all kidnapped for ransom.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the funny thing about money,
Yeah.
Even Al-Qaeda terrorists that are kidnapping on behalf of their cause, as soon as people start throwing money at them, they're like, ooh, well, this money stuff's kind of cool. I like having money.
Yeah.
And
weed through ideology too, huh?
yeah, terrorist groups from South America to the Middle East to Africa, their political causes fall away real fast once somebody starts throwing money at them.
Uh-huh.
So the most of the business, if you will, was Colombia at the time, former Marxist terrorists getting a taste of making good money as kidnappers.
Yeah.
And because of all the things that country went to, the kidnapping business there was winding down. And then I, did some kidnappings in the Philippines and a bunch of stuff in Iraq, some in Africa, a little bit in Mexico.
And was it always backing up Americans, or were you helping with foreigners getting kidnapped as well?
Yeah, the only way that the Bureau can officially get involved overseas in a kidnapping is if it's an American hostage,
right?
Or if there's a demand against the United States government.
Got it. Okay. So, okay, got it. And so how long were you there for? How long did you do that?
Yeah, then I stayed there for the last 7 years of my career.
Okay.
Pretty much, especially after I got up to my eyeballs in the kidnappings about 10 months in, I didn't have a day off, but for 7 years. But I loved it. It was, I thought it was a privilege. I enjoyed doing it, and it was a good run. I was happy to have done it. I was happy it was over at the right time.
And so was there like just a deadline on your retirement from that always, or did you have like a point where you're like, okay, this has been enough, it's time to move on?
No, I just, external circumstances, the universe conspired to show me the door. And the universe had shown me the door, and by getting passed over for promotion in New York. And that ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me, getting passed over for a promotion.
Yeah.
And so by the time I got passed over for promotion after being down at Quantico for 7 years, I thought, well, last time I got passed over for promotion and I took it as a door opening in another direction, it was awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going out the door this time.
Nice.
And I went out the door.
And was the next step your book? Like what was your plan going out the door? Did you just kind of leap, kind of, what do you got, leap of faith there, where you just jumped and figured you'd figure it out?
Well, I had a little bit of an exit strategy. I don't know if you remember the movie way back when, Back to School, Rodney Dangerfield, the comedian, goes back to school. So I kind of did the Rodney Dangerfield thing, and I went back to school. I decided to get a master's. There was a really unique program, still is, at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, where you get a master's degree in a year. You got to go to school for full time, but based on your life experience, you apply, and if they judge your life experience to be sufficient and you're still interested in public policy, and I was, then you get a shot at this special 1 year's master's program. So, I bailed to do that, and it was sort of a buffer for me getting out of the government and as making my way into the private sector.
Got it. And so you went to school, and then did you have a plan coming out? Did you know you wanted to start a consultancy, or were you figuring it out during that year?
Yeah, no, I had a plan, to quote Dwight Eisenhower, no plan ever survives the first encounter with the battlefield.
Amen.
So but you got to have a plan still.
Yeah, I agree.
You just got to be able to adapt.
Yeah.
So I got out, and I just figured a bunch of stuff would fall into place. Now, the two things: first of all, they weren't going to fall into place as easily as I thought, and then secondly, as I was finishing up at Harvard, it was the depths of the 2007, 2008 recession.
Yep.
Like, I got out when we were hitting the bottom of the recession, and nobody knew it at the time. When you're hitting the bottom, people think like there's no end in sight.
Right.
But as it turns out, if you rotate out of the government, if where you try to start is at the bottom, you actually catch a bit of a break, because there's kind of nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
You don't know it at the time, but you didn't ride the economy down like everybody else did. And riding the economy down is some brutal stuff.
Yep. Agreed.
I mean, that just kicks people's tails to be doing the same thing and be making less money.
Yep.
And although I was panicking as I was leaving Harvard, because I was like, none of the stuff that I thought was going to materialize is materializing.
Yeah.
But I had some fallback positions. I'd stayed in the government long enough to have a pension, so I had some money coming in.
Yeah.
And I went back to where I was living on a boat in DC at the time, and so I went back to my boat. It was relatively inexpensive.
Yep.
And then just started scratching and clawing.
And what were you
and learning?
What was the original, when you came out? Were you just trying to find people that wanted your type of expertise, or like how were you positioning yourself when you came out?
Yeah, well, I always thought that there was a natural application. I mean, my brothers and sisters at the program on negotiation at Harvard had convinced me that it was completely applicable to business. The old philosophy, build a better mousetrap in a world will be a path to your door, is nonsense.
Yeah.
Like, hostage negotiation for business, what is now the black swan method, is without question a better mousetrap.
Mm-hmm.
And that does not relieve you from marketing or getting out there and pounding the pavement and paying your dues and figuring out ways to show people that.
Yep.
So, my Brandon, the president of the company, involved really from the very beginning. I caught a couple lucky breaks on teaching. I got a chance to turn around, go back to Harvard and teach again.
Oh, nice.
Good friends gave me a real good break. John Richardson pulled me into a class that he was teaching. And then in DC, then I heard that there was an opening at Georgetown to teach negotiation in the MBA program.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, where have you taught before? And thanks to John, I could say, well, I taught at Harvard.
Yeah. Perfect.
And they said, have you got a syllabus? And I said, I got a syllabus. And then I got the gig at Georgetown. And that's when Brandon and I really got serious about making sure we developed the methodology. And we worked on it for about 2 or 3 years at Georgetown before we felt like we had an entire book pulled together. And that's when, I dug Tall Roz up, and Tall helped us birth Never Split the Difference.
Got it. And obviously the book's been a booming success. I don't know many people that don't know it or haven't read it, at least in my circles. How much did you know ahead of time that was going to be such a tipping point? I assume that it has been a tipping point for your business, but maybe unfair assumption, but sounds like that really helped things skyrocket too, correct?
No, yeah, not just a tipping point, but a real skyrocketing thing. I will tell you, the first step was kind of find an agent and a writer at the same time. And I had agents tell me, no one is ever going to buy this book. Sometimes you wonder why you take meetings with people if the only thing they want to do is tell you why your idea is horrible.
Yep.
And I can remember talking to a couple agents on the phone. It was a man and a woman in this agency. The man was more senior. The woman was encouraging. And we had a conference call, and he went on and on about how the world was full of negotiation books. The world was not looking for more, and no publisher would ever buy this book. We'd be lucky to get a book deal at all. And I'm thinking like, wow, your whole reason for this meeting, was to destroy somebody else's idea. Why even take the meeting?
Yeah.
And then ended up getting introduced to Steve Ross, and Steve Ross had been the agent for another business book by an FBI agent, Joe Navarro's book, What Everybody Is Telling You on Body Language.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve wasn't all that encouraging initially. He said, I don't know how this is going to do domestically, but I got a lot of contacts overseas, and I know I can sell the heck out of this overseas. We will sell this all over the world because the overseas market has got a big appetite with anything FBI on it. And, you know, because of Steve, the book's in 36 countries.
Wow.
Globally, 30 languages, 36 countries. But even Steve didn't anticipate. We put together a book proposal, and he just went to test the water with the publishers, and the publishers went nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, he initially panicked. He called me on the phone. He says, "You got to come to New York for 2 weeks, and we got to make a tour of all the publishers." And I said, "No, because over the next 2 weeks, I have obligations, and we do not break our obligations. Once we make a commitment is in ink. I got 1 day." And he said, "All right, cool. We'll do an auction. And you got to come up to New York, and I am going to schedule 9 hours of meetings for you. You're going to sit in, and you're going to talk to all the top publishers. And I'm going to work you as hard as anybody could work you for 9 hours." I'm cool. I'm into hard work that works.
Yep.
And Steve arranged an auction, and because we met the HarperCollins people in those 9 hours and hit it off with them, we loved them. Hollis Heimbach led the team and is still my contact there. Nice. And they bid, and they treated us very well ever since.
It's done well. Well, a couple more questions for you. One, what's next? You've built this incredible consultancy. You've literally written the book on negotiating. And what's the dreams going forward? Do you have a vision of the next, 5-10 years, what it's going to look like?
Well, we're still building the company out. I mean, there's more demand than we can supply.
Yep.
And one thing I didn't really anticipate that's been a really big part of our business is, two things. Number one, we're focused on high performance individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Like I initially thought we would teach companies, and we get hired to teach and train companies, and we drop the seed in the company, and they'd see how smart this stuff was, and they'd grow it themselves internally.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not the case. The vast majority of companies will not take responsibility for your training. They think it should be on you. They don't have a learning culture. They don't invest in their people. It's one of the reasons why 40% of the Fortune 500 is going to be gone in 10 years.
Yep.
Because they just don't take care of their people.
Yep.
And then the high performance individuals, like all of our marketing, everything that we do outbound is designed to go after the high performer.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to argue with you about a new idea. They love new ideas.
Yep.
They love stuff that makes them uncomfortable. They love to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, they soak this stuff up like a sponge. So I didn't envision we'd be focused on top performers, on individuals. And then we coach a lot. And we have more demand for coaching than we have coaches, because we want to make sure our people know what they're doing.
Yep.
So we're going to continue to build out. We're going to coach. We continue to evolve the ideas. We put, a training session at one of our superstars, Derek Gaunt, just finished a course called When Things Go Wrong.
Yep.
So, putting it out in different formats and tailoring it to how people want to learn is, and evolving the ideas and learning neuroscience, adding everything we're learning about the difference between oxytocin and dopamine and what that does to you and how to trigger it.
Yeah.
Part of a negotiation process. So we're still learning, and we're looking to expand a little more overseas, probably starting in, actually I was just notified yesterday that we're already planning training for London in June.
Wow, awesome. And last question for me, someone else trying to pursue their dream. You took such an unorthodox path for, a lot of people that end up on your level. And what would you say to someone that's got an idea of what they want to do, what's young or old? They could be, 15, they could be 70. What's kind of that one piece of advice you either wish you heard or are glad you heard to kind of keep you going on the direction you wanted to?
You want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go as a team.
Amen.
Now, the numbers for startups that survive, that are started by teams versus started by individuals, is like no comparison.
Yeah.
Like 9 out of 10 sole founder entrepreneurial startups, 9 out of 10 fail. I don't know what the numbers are for teams of 3 or more, but I know the numbers are much higher.
Yeah.
And then, being part of a team is not just leading a team. One of the biggest things for me was I always led teams, and I always would have described myself as a team player, as long as I was in lead. And to really be a team player, what was it? Chris Rock had a routine recently where he says you got to learn to play a tambourine.
Yeah.
Somebody else is a lead guitar, somebody else might be the lead singer. Sometimes it's your job to play the tambourine.
Yeah.
That's really good advice. How do you get yourself out of the way of your team? Or, you're the CEO, you can make a decision. Like, no, I can't.
Yeah.
I mean, I could, but that'd mean I was shoving stuff down my team's throat. And I had a conversation with my director of marketing today, who's my daughter-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, look, I apologize for leaning into this without talking to you about it first, because I realized we got to get the team around it and you've got your priorities.
Yep.
So, being part of a team, what it really means to be a team player, nobody will tell you they're not a team player, but what they're really after is for the team to join them versus their willingness to join a team. I have turned down former FBI negotiators explicitly with those words. I've said, you want us to join your team.
Yep.
And we need you to join ours. And since those aren't the same things, it's just not a match.
Great advice, and funny enough, stuff I'm going through right now with how to enable my team and step away as the leader and more a part of, which is fun. We got a big enough team now that it's important to also have those people and have people around you that are better at certain things too. So I think that is very good advice. And Chris, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on HawkeTalk.
I enjoyed the conversation, man. I appreciate that. Can I give people a way to follow up if they want to learn more?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, the Black Swan method. If you want to be a Black Swan, if you want to learn this method, which has evolved well beyond hostage negotiation, simplest way is to sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but that's not why it's valuable. It's valuable because it's actionable and it's concise. So the easiest way to sign up is a text to sign up function. You send the message Black Swan method to learn the Black Swan method. Black Swan method, 3 words, not cap sensitive. Text to the number 33777. That's 33777. Black Swan method, just those 3 words, not the Black Swan method, Black Swan method. You get a text back asking for your email address. The newsletter is a gateway to everything that we have, and we got a lot of free stuff that'll help you on your journey.
That's awesome. I'm going to sign up right now too. Really appreciate this, Chris, and I'm sure we will talk soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course.
You've been listening to the Hawke Media Podcast. To ensure that you never miss an episode, make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.